at this story in Genesis 22 in the Septuagint, so you look at it in the Greek language, which is what the New Testament is also written in. The Gospel of John is written in Greek. And you compare the language, virtually identical. John made the connection. He got the Emmaus Road imagination from the Lord. Okay? There's something to this story. And he's coming to him and he says, take now your son. And it's like he sticks a dagger in his heart, but that's not enough. Your only son. And it's like he sticks a second dagger in his heart, but that's not enough. Isaac, whose name means laughter, who brought you joy in your old age, whom you love, he says, dagger upon dagger into this man's heart, and take him to the land of Moriah and sacrifice him on an altar there, on a mountain that I will show you once you get there. And if you know the story of the life of Abraham and you're reading through it, you just want to stand up in the middle of the story and scream, no, you can't do this. If you're getting into the nitty-gritty of the story. If you're stepping into the sandals of this man the way you ought. If you're feeling it like a dad. I mean, this is a horrific thought. Anyone who is a parent understands that. You don't even have to be. If you work with kids, you get it. It is awful. This would be terrible for any dad to have to do. But Abraham, my goodness, this man has waited 100 years for a boy. He suffered through 100 years, in some sense, of infertility, at least with his one and only wife, Sarah. She suffered through 90. And after she is long dead in her ability to have birth, God gives her a child. What does that tell you about God? What does Abraham learn from that experience? That God can bring life out of death. You see? That's important to this story. God has given him a living child out of a woman who, procreatively speaking, in terms of her ability to give birth, all her life for 90 years, and she's way past menopause, was incapable of doing so. He's a God who brings life from death, but you hear this and you think, my goodness. But even that's not enough, because God has come to Abraham and he said, this son Isaac is the son of promise. This son Isaac is the son through which one day I will bring the salvation of the world. The salvation of the world, your salvation and my salvation in the day of Abraham, in the day that God came to Abraham and made this command, was resided in this boy. So now he's going to kill the salvation of the world in some sense. Because Isaac's about 16 years old. And his dad's about 116 years old. And Isaac doesn't have any children. He's not even married. So what's going on here? I mean, you look at it and go, ah! And you need to do that as you prepare to preach. As you prepare to teach. You've got to get in it. You've got to feel it. It says, now it came about after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. Abraham said, here I am. And God said, listen how he says it, now take now your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac. Go to the land of Moriah, the place where Jerusalem will later be located, and offer him there as a burnt offering upon the mountains of which I will tell you. And it's important for you to know that Abraham knew that this was the voice of the Lord. And Abraham knew also exactly what it is the Lord was commanding him to do. It was not ambiguous. And Abraham knew what a burnt offering was all about. Abraham knew that the burnt offering involved a slit throat. Abraham knew that a burnt offering involved pouring the lifeblood completely out of the sacrifice. And Abraham knew that that offering involved burning the body of the sacrifice, wholly consuming it in flames. We are so familiar with these stories, so many of us, that we miss the emotion of it. Don't miss the emotion of it. Feel it, sit in it, rest in it. Let it make you uncomfortable. Let it make your people uncomfortable as you teach it. Let them interact with it. Remember that they might be hearing it for the first time, and you're hearing it for the 1,000th and first time. That's fine. But what questions did you have when you heard it the first time? Think about it from their perspective and interact with their emotions as you go through the story and give them a chance to go, no! And say no for them. So what is Abraham going to do? This is your father. It says, so Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey. And he took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac, his son. His obedience to God is immediate and it is complete. Look at what he does. And he split the wood for the burnt offering. Why does he do that? So you've got to ask yourself that. I mean, good grief, he's going to, as you know the story, he's going to travel 3 days. 3 days. That sound familiar? 3 days on the third day. So now why does he do the wood? Because he doesn't know exactly what mountain he's going to go to. I mean, he knows the mountain range, but he doesn't know the location that the Lord is going to identify for him. And he wants to be sure that wherever that is, he is going to have absolutely everything he needs to complete his obedience to God. He doesn't want to get up on the top of that mountain and figure out that there's no wood and not be able to do what God has told him to do. This man is determined to sacrifice his son. His son is as good as dead to him the moment the Lord God comes to him and says, I want you to take your son, I want you to go to this mountain range, and I want you to sacrifice him. His son is dead to him. That's important, because how long is his son dead to him? How many days does he travel? 3. And so then on the third day, when God spares him, does he not receive his son as if back from the dead? Because that's exactly what the book of Hebrews chapter 11 says. You see that? That's the Lord, guys. It's phenomenal. Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and he split the wood for the burnt offering. And he arose and he went to the place of which God had told him. And on the third day, when you're reading through the Old Testament and you come to something that says on the third day, take a good look at that story, because it's almost always involves Jesus. Somehow it's a picture. Watch the third day. On the third day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance, and he walked over to the bushes, and he puked out whatever little bit of breakfast he was able to choke down in his grief that morning. Didn't he? With tears streaming down his eyes, he looks up and he sees the place, because he knows where the mountain range is. He's going there. This is heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching stuff. This is a real man, a real father, a real son. So Abraham said to his young men, his 2 servants that he brought with him, and this is his greatest statement of faith right here. He says, stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go over there, and we will worship, and we will return to you. And he doesn't mean I'm going to come back to you looking like you see me right now, and my son's going to come back in this jar, because, I'm going to cut his throat and bleed him out. It's going to be like he's going to come back in an urn. No, he says, take a good look at me and take a good look at my son and understand that we're going to go worship and we're going to come back looking exactly the way we do right now. How in the world can he say that? He can say that because he believes in a God who brings life out of death. He's already seen it in his life. His God brought forth a son from the dead womb of his wife and waited until way after menopause just to make sure that he got the message. And what he thinks, the way he's reasoned in his mind in faith, is he's going to go up there, he's going to sacrifice his son, and God is going to raise up his son from the ashes, and he and his son will then return yet again to the servants. That's the faith of your father Abraham. That's the Christian faith. It is a resurrection faith. Amen. Paul says if Jesus is not raised, well then of all men we are to be most pitied. Why are we to be most pitied? Because, think about it. There are some benefits to being a believer. If you're a believer, even if you're wrong, you think you're forgiven at the very least. You have peace. You have... The reason that we are the most to be pitied is because we live for another world and we give our lives away. We live like Noah, like crazy people to those who don't understand that this is a perishing place. We are so sacrificial that if we're wrong, we are the most men of all men to be pitied. But if we are right, we are of all peoples the most to be desired and admired. So anyway, Abraham says to the young man, he says, stay here with the donkey and I, the lad, will go over. And we will worship and we will return to you. And then it says Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering. He laid it on his son. So now the son is going to carry the wood of sacrifice up the hill. That sounds familiar. He lays it on his son, who's also 16, and dad's about 116. So who do you think is stronger?
16.
No, come on. Who do you think is faster? Yeah. Who's faster? Who's quicker? Who has more endurance? And I'm 45, and a 16-year-old runs circles around me. He's 116. Now, he's a pretty strong 116, but still. It says, and Abraham the father took in his hand the instruments of death, the fire and the knife. See, the son carries the wood, and so the two of them walked on together. And Isaac spoke to Abraham his father, and he said, my father. And Abraham said, here I am, my son. He's right there with him. And Isaac asks the obvious question. He said, behold, the fire and the wood, the implements of death. But where is the what? The lamb. That is a key word. The lamb. Where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Well, that tells you some things about Isaac, doesn't it? It tells you that Isaac knows what a sacrifice and a burnt offering is all about. He gets it. Cut throat, bled out, burnt up. He has no delusions about what this is all about, and he also knows that it is by the blood of a lamb that the Lord's wrath for our sin is assuaged. It's satisfied. He's a bright boy. He gets it. He's been raised well. So Isaac spoke to his father, and he said, my father. And Abraham said, here I am, my son. And Isaac said, behold, the fire and wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Don't forget that question. And then Abraham stops to throw up in the bushes again before he answers this. And he said, God will provide for himself the lamb. There's that word again. For the burnt offering, my son. Is he lying? Is he making up a story? Is he trying to pull a fast one? Abraham is a prophet. He's making a statement of truth. The Lord will provide the lamb. There's no doubt. That's exactly what's going to happen. He says God will provide himself, for himself. He provides for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And so the two of them walked on together, and they came to the place of which God had told him. And Abraham built the altar there. He gathers up the uncut stones from which an altar is built. He takes the wood from his son. He arranges it on top of those stones. And then he tells Isaac who the sacrifice is really going to be. And what does Isaac do? Does he out-wrestle his dad? Does he outrun his dad? He says, tie me up and lay me down. He willingly gives his life in faith in resurrection from the dead. See how that works? He believes that he will die and be raised. They came to the place of which God had told them. Abraham built the altar. There he arranged the wood. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Rembrandt, the great painter, spent years meditating on this passage of Scripture, as he did others. And he had various different kinds of pictures. I think I've got one of them in here. And I think that was his last one that he created. And you see the knife. It's quite a knife. You can see the wood on top of the stones. You can see the haggard, weary look on an old man's face. He's surprised. And look what he does with the face of his son. He can't even look at him. He covers it. Now, we don't actually have the photograph of the real deal, but I think Rembrandt is brilliant. It says, Abraham stretched out his hand and he took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, and he said, Abraham, Abraham. Why does he say it twice? Is Abraham dull? Does he can't hear? What's his problem? See that all over the Bible. See that with David. His son Absalom dies. What does he say about his son? He says, Absalom, Absalom, my son, my son. Do you hear that? Over and over again, you see these things. Jesus appears to Paul on the road to Damascus, and he says, Paul, Paul. Paul's not hard of hearing. You heard him the first time. If you didn't hear him, you saw the light. He was blinded for crying out loud. It's not like he's trying to get his attention. In the Hebrew language, the repetition of one's name is a statement of affection. It's a statement of endearment. He's saying, Abraham, Abraham, I love you, Abraham. You're my guy. That's what makes the Lord's words so terrifying in the New Testament when he says, people will come to me in that day and they will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not do miracles in your name? Did we not cast out demons in your name? Did we not? And he'll say, away from me, I never knew you. They're claiming to know him intimately, and they know him not at all. The Lord cries out, Abraham, Abraham, he says. And Abraham says, here I am, through his tears. The angel said, do not stretch out your hand against the lad and do nothing to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son. You hear the repetition? From me. Then Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and behold, looked behind him, and behold him, behind him there was a lamb. That's not what it says. It's not a lamb. All through the story it's the lamb. And then you get to here and it's a ram. And it's caught in the thicket by its horns. And Abraham went and took the ram. You see how he repeats these words over and over again so you can't miss it. He took the ram and he offered him up for a burnt offering in the place of his son, you see. And so he receives his son, according to the writer of the Hebrews, as if back from the dead on the third day. So anyway, you come to the creation story, and you come to it, I hope now, with the mindset that this is a book about redemption. And on the front end of the creation story, I want to tell you, I think the Lord God created the heavens and the earth exactly as it says in here. I think that he did it in the space of 6 literal days. A lot of scholars would disagree with that. I think that it's what the Bible says. And it makes no sense to me. I think the word day means day. I don't think it means an age of time and so on and so forth, but people disagree on that. However, I don't think that what God is trying to do with the story of creation is to satisfy all of our intellectual curiosities about all of the chemical and physical and biological processes by which he brought about the creation of the heavens and the earth. In other words, I don't think this is God's attempt to put on his scientific white lab coat and stand in front of a whiteboard and spell out how he did it all. I don't think that's his purpose. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then it just starts telling us this story. And heavens and earth, and that phrase, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. That phrase, heavens and earth, is what poets call a merism. A merism is a deal where you take a whole spectrum and you state one thing that is on one end of the spectrum and the other thing that is on the other end of the spectrum. And by doing that, you mean to include everything in between. So, when somebody says, we talked about everything from A to Z, well, that means they talked about A, B, C, D, you understand? But the merism is A to Z. When somebody checks you out from head to toe, they don't just look at your head and toes, do they? Get the idea? God is the Alpha and the Omega. He is the beginning and He is the end. And He is everything in between. He declares the beginning from the end. And He declares everything in between as well. That's the idea. That's the nature of the language. So Moses, who's writing the creation story for us, starts with a poetic device. He doesn't start with a white lab coat and a little beaker, and that's not the point. God comes and says, I created the heavens and the earth. And then He begins to tell us this story. So in the beginning, God creates the heavens and the earth. And then what happens? It's like a play. It's like a drama. It's like the curtains open all of a sudden, and there's this grand stage, and what you see next in the creation story is the earth. And what does the earth look like? It's covered with water. We talked about that yesterday. It's part of the reason why I'm going to skip through some of this. It's covered with water. It's dark. There's no light. It's dead. There's no life. It's formless. And what that means is that it's in a state of chaos. And it's void. It is completely empty. You see? And God wants you to look at that earth and take that earth in for a minute in its state of utter chaos and darkness and death and emptiness. And then over the space of 6 days, what does God do? He orders that which is chaotic, and He fills that which is empty. He spends 3 days ordering things and 3 days filling things. And each of these 3 days correspond to each other. The first day with the fourth, the second day with the fifth, the third day with the sixth. He's coming to us from the very beginning and He's saying, guys, there is darkness, and there is death, and there is chaos, and there is emptiness. And from the first page of the Bible, He is saying, I and I alone am the answer for that. That world that He gives you, as the curtains open and you see it, is your heart before the Lord God's creative Word begins to operate in it. It's dark. It's dead. It's chaotic. It's out of control. It's untamed. And it's empty. And the Lord God alone can step into that and by His creative Word change it all. And one of the most amazing parts of the creation story for me is the stars. The stars are awesome. I don't know if you guys like to look at the stars. I don't know if you ever go online and there's like a Hubble telescope website. If you've ever done that and just looked at the galaxies upon galaxies upon galaxies upon galaxies that you see out there, they are absolutely unbelievable. You look at it and think, it's mind-boggling what's out there. As God tells the creation story through Moses, you know what it says about the stars? It's a tiny little phrase that just says, and the stars too. That's it. It's like all of that, He just flung them out. And the stars. Oh yeah, and the stars too. And God has allowed us to live in a day when we get to see those stars in unique and dramatic ways. And I wonder if He doesn't get a little bit excited, if He doesn't sit around going, man, I've been waiting for 5,000, 6,000 years for you guys to get that picture, because that's one of my favorites right there, the Whirlpool Galaxy. It's amazing. So anyway, God is telling us from the beginning of the Bible about redemption. That's what the book is about. And people, it frustrates me a little bit, want to come to this text and they want to argue all about how God did it. And I want to say, look, I think God did it. He tells us He did it. He did it in 6 days. And I think He did it in such a way as to create a story that tells us about redemption. That's what the text is about. That's what the Bible is about. So anyway, you see that happen. You go to chapter 2. And we talked about this yesterday. But this is where God creates the woman from man. You remember the story? He takes the sinless man and makes him sleep. Sleep is a metaphor for death. While the sinless man is sleeping, He wounds the sinless man in the side. Pierces his side. Out of that wounding, He fashions a bride. And He wakes the sinless man up from the sleep. It's a picture of the gospel. It's a picture of the sinless Jesus who suffers and dies, who's pierced in the side while sleeping the sleep of death, that out of His wounding He might fashion a bride. You get to chapter 3. Chapter 3 is the fall of man. We've talked about that already today. Man eats from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And in that moment plunges all of us into this state of sinfulness and death. And yet God's coming and He's speaking His gospel in that Genesis 3:15 passage that we looked at. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise or crush you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. It's teaching us, as we talked about this morning, to look for that one who will be born supernaturally and who will crush the serpent. Follow? You get to chapter 4. You've got the feud between Cain and Abel, because as we said yesterday, what develops now out of the man and the woman who immediately start having children in light of that promise of the seed of the woman, that's a step of faith on their part. The first thing you read is they have a child. You know, they were going after that Savior the way we ought to. Well, what develops is those two bloodlines, the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And you have Cain, the serpent, and you have Abel. And Abel offers that righteous sacrifice. It's a blood sacrifice. Yikes. But you also have Cain, who's sent off to live in the land of Nod. It means wandering. He settles in the land of wandering. Isn't that interesting? It's ironic. He makes his home in the land of wandering. And he builds a city. That's contrary to the way God works. God tells His people to scatter over the face of the earth and to plant within this earth a godly seed. That's what you do, by the way, as you take forth this gospel. He doesn't tell us to build cities. He tells us this place is not our home. We inherit cities. When the people of God are brought into the land of Canaan by Joshua, they're given cities. They don't have to build them. We inherit cities. We're looking for a city that we don't build up. We're looking for a city that comes in. Okay? And you'll remember from yesterday that we talked about the fact that those first 7 chapters of the Bible describe a world that was created and then a world that was destroyed by a flood. The world that began with water ended with water. And our world that we live in today was born out of water, just like the original world. Remember? Just like in the original world you have Adam, in this new world that we live in, there was Noah. Just like Adam ate from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and fell into sin, Noah drank from the fruit of the vine and fell into sin. Just like Adam's children were cursed, produced a godly line and a cursed line, so also Noah. It's the same story. And just like Cain builds a city, that's what you see happen next in the book of Genesis before you get to the story of Abraham. It follows the same pattern. And we said yesterday that the significance of that is how the pattern ends. It ends in sudden judgment. It comes in a day. Thus the urgency of what you and I did. We're getting people on the ark, man. That's the idea. We're loading them up. All right. Genesis 11, beginning in verse 1. It says, "Now the whole earth used the same language and the same words." So the idea is that there is one people, one language, and they are on one mission, and it is God's mission. God has commanded them to scatter and to fill the earth with a godly seed. And what they're doing instead is they're gathering. They're staying together. They're hanging together as one. They're disobeying the Lord. It came about as they, all together, is the idea, journeyed east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar. They intentionally chose a place that was large and undivided so they could all live together as one. There are no mountains there. There's no oceans to separate them. There's nothing to keep them from being together. And they settled there in disobedience to the Lord is the point. And then they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they used brick, stone, and they used tar for mortar. Okay? And you wonder why in the world are they telling us about all these building materials and all of that kind of stuff? What Moses is saying is that they're developing technologically. And they're using their technology in disobedience to the Lord. Look what they're doing. They say, "Come and let us build for ourselves a city." They're like Cain, who built a city for his son Enoch. "And a tower whose top will reach into heaven." A tower who will build it will go into heaven is the idea, to reach into heaven. All right, what they're talking about is a ziggurat. I'm going to show you a picture of a ziggurat. But a ziggurat is basically a stepped pyramid. And in the ancient days, the ziggurats were said to be stairways to heaven. And you've heard about ziggurats, maybe you've seen some pictures of ziggurats in the past. You wonder what in the world, what's up with these guys. What they would do is they would build this stepped pyramid that had its roots in the earth and its uppermost part in the heavens. On the top of the pyramid, there's a shrine. And it was said to be the place where God would come down and man would ascend and they would meet. And oftentimes they would paint the shrine, this little temple at the top of the ziggurat, in a light blue enamel, so that it would look like, when you looked up at it, like it blended or faded into the sky. Does that make sense? So they're creating for themselves a stairway to heaven, and I think what they're really trying to do is to create or to recreate the Garden of Eden. But you can see the ziggurat. And this is your shrine. See? It's a stepped pyramid. That's what they're creating. They're not actually trying to create something that goes like so high that they're trying to create a pyramid, a shrine on the top, where God and man can dwell. And I think what they're trying to do is to recreate the Garden of Eden for themselves, by their own efforts, by their own wealth, by their own power, and by their own technology. And I say that because when you read the story about the Garden of Eden carefully, it appears that the Garden of Eden was located in a high place. The waters and the rivers run down from it. And so what these people are trying to do is to create for themselves their own paradise apart from God, in opposition to the God who told them not to do this, but to scatter. And I think a lot of us do that. I think all of us are tempted to. I mean, not to make a big pyramid in our backyard or anything, but to try to create for ourselves our own little paradise, our own little place, to do things our way, to make our life the way that we want it. It says they said, come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower, whose top will reach into heaven, and let us make for ourselves a what? A name. The idea of the name carries with it the idea of immortality. Let us make a mark that lasts forever. Let us create for ourselves a name that never dies. Let us generate by our own ability an everlasting name. Immortality, apart from God. Otherwise, we will be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth, which is, of course, what the Lord told them to do. And so they begin to build this ziggurat, and I'm sure from their perspective that it was a pretty impressive sight. But Moses makes fun of it in the text. And you have to read it with that kind of an idea in mind. He says, the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of man had built. Now, that doesn't mean that God had to leave heaven. The everywhere present God had to leave heaven to come down to check it out. God's everywhere. He knows exactly what they're doing. He knows exactly what I'm doing, what you're doing, what we're doing now. Moses is saying that the sum total of all of their technology, of all of their abilities, of all of their wealth, of all of their power, of all of their efforts is so unimpressive that it's like such a tiny little thing that God has to come down almost like with a magnifying glass to take a look at it. The greatest thing that this people, all of them together, one language, united, could create is this teeny tiny little freckle on the face of the planet. It's humiliating them the way that he speaks of it. And yet the reality is we do that all the time. We're all trying to create a little bump on the earth somewhere and make for ourselves a name. So it says the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of man had built. And the Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they all have the same language. And there's power to that. There's a sense in which with the internet and so forth, we're seeing the undoing of what's about to happen, which is the confusion of languages. We're finding ways to communicate with one another. We're breaking down language barriers. And as we do that, what's happening? Our technology is accelerating in leaps and bounds. And so many good things are coming from that. But technology that is not tied to virtue is a scary thing. And that's really the sense in which God is speaking here. The Lord God says, behold, they're one people. They all have the same language. Their technology is, going crazy. And this is what they began to do. And now nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them. He's saying all that they plan to do will not be withheld from them. And he's not saying they're actually going to be able to create their own paradise. He's saying, look at the wickedness of this people. If I leave them alone, there is no depth of wickedness that they will not experience and go for. That's our heart, unleashed. And we talked about the internet, pornography, and all that. That's our heart, unleashed. The internet can be the greatest thing going, and it can be the craziest and ugliest thing going. It's both. So in grace, God stops it by dividing them linguistically. He says, come and let us go down there and confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech. And so the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, which means confusion. Because there the Lord confused the language of the whole earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the earth. And then if you keep reading in that chapter, you have the genealogy of Shem, the seed of the woman, son of Noah, which leads you to Abraham. And what God is doing is he's saying, okay, you see these people, now let me show you what it's supposed to look like. Here's a man of faith. Genesis 12, verse 1, it says, now the Lord said to Abram, by means of your own effort and wealth and technology, I want you to build your own city with a big tower and make a name for yourself. No. He says, go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house. 3 things. See that? And each one of those things gets closer and more intimate. From your country, from your relatives, from your father's house. It's sort of like when he came to him and said, I want you to take your son, your only son, Isaac. It's 3 daggers. God does this in 3s with them, it seems. Go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house. Leave it all behind. Everything that you've looked to for happiness and security in this life. And go where? I'm not going to tell you where. Just go to the land which I will show you. And what land is that? Because the writer to the Hebrews tells us. In Hebrews 11:8, it says, by faith Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith he lived as a what? As an alien in the land of promise. As in a foreign land. Dwelling in tents, not in cities. He's a nomad. With Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise. For he, Abraham, was looking for the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. He's not looking for an earthly city. He's looking for a heavenly city. That's the idea. Significant. God says to Abraham, go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. And I will bless you, and I will make your name great. He's going to have a great name, but by the gift of God. And so you shall be a blessing, and I will curse them, or bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you, through the gospel is the idea, all the families of the earth will be blessed. And then it says, so Abraham went forth, as the Lord had spoken. And he declared his citizenship, not by what he said, but by what he did. And that's how you know. You know, when you read through that list of the heroes of faith in Hebrews chapter 11, it doesn't say things like, you know, Abel claimed to offer a better sacrifice. No, it says that he did it. You know, by faith, it says Enoch claimed to please. No, his life pleased the Lord. By faith, Abraham left. The idea being that, you know, we declare where our citizenship is by the way that we live. Not just like the things that we say. All right? I got an email about, I don't know, 2 months ago maybe, from a girl who is the daughter of one of my best friends. And she's 25 years old. She's really, really sharp. She's an on-fire believer. She's EE trained. She has some seminary education. She's one of those young people that you look at and go, the future looks bright when I look at her. And she's working for a defense contractor in Washington, D.C., and she's working with a guy who is ex-special forces in the military. He's returned from war as recently as, I think, 2008. And she's been trying to witness to this man, telling him about this God who is in charge of all things, telling him about this God who has a plan that is good for all of our lives, telling him about this God who loved so much that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him might have life, and so forth. And he's countering her with all of his experiences from the battlefield. And they are significant. This guy, and I can't tell you some of the things that she shared with me, but he has seen and he has done, in the name of war, horrible things. And I understand that as you shoot another person, or in this case, many other people, you're shooting the enemy. And it's shoot or be shot, kill or be killed. I understand that. But I also have to believe that when you scope in another human being in your high-powered rifle, when you pull the trigger and you watch them drop, that leaves a wound in your heart. And you can deny that, you can ignore that, you can try to suppress that. That's what we men do. We suppress, but it hurts. And in addition to that, he was a commander of a group of soldiers, and one day he lost 15 men. One day. And he personally called every one of their families to let them know. How do you tell that to a wife with little kids running around yelling in the background of the phone? How do you tell that to a father or to a son? You see? How do you tell that to a mother? So you can imagine the trauma that this man has experienced in his life. And so she's trying to tell him about this God who loves him, who has a plan, who foreordains whatsoever comes to pass, as I said yesterday, and as the Scripture teaches, quite frankly. you might be having a little bit of a problem with that. You've got to feel that. So she writes to me and says, what do I say? I thought, oh, good grief, you know. Sometimes everybody expects we pastors have all the answers. We don't have all the answers. But I sent her an email, and I hope that this was helpful to her. She told me that it was. So I want to start this message just by reading this email to you. And I'm going to call this guy's name Bill. His name is not Bill. But we'll go with Bill, okay? So I'm writing this friend of mine, and I said, wow. Well, here goes. I said, I like to think of my life like a puzzle piece. It's one part of a really big picture that I cannot see. In fact, all that I can see is my one little piece. I can see its colors and hues and shapes, and I can speculate about what it is and about what it all means, but that's the best that I can do because I can't see the big picture that it fits into. I can't see the overarching theme into which my little puzzle piece life fits and in which alone its final meaning and purposes are found. God alone sees the big picture. God alone has the box top of the puzzle. In fact, He created that picture, and it's His puzzle. And here's the deal. He also created my little life with all of its colors and all of its hues and often odd and nonsensical shapes. And He created it to fit into the whole of His really big picture. And in finding its place in His picture, and then and only there, to make perfect sense. As a result, I think that it's unreasonable to expect that my life will always make perfect sense to me in the here and now. My vision is too limited. The scope of my wisdom is too small, and God and life, for that matter, has not led me to believe otherwise. When I go to God's Word, He tells me directly that His thoughts are not my thoughts, and that His ways are not my ways. He tells me plainly that as the heavens are higher than the earth, so also are His thoughts than my thoughts. And so then, what is He saying to me? Well, at the very least, He's saying, Tom, you're finite, and I'm infinite. You're limited, Tom, and I'm unlimited. By your very nature, you are incapable of comprehending all of my thoughts and ways. And you cannot reasonably expect to be able to do so. Such an expectation is illogical. It makes no sense. Tom, there will be things in your life for which you have no explanation. Expect it. Things that make no sense. Anticipate. Pain that seems meaningless and pointless from your itty-bitty, microscopic, puny, infinitesimally small, sin-stained, corrupted perspective. So if I can just say this somewhat gently, get over yourself and stop arrogantly assuming that I, God, am as limited as you are, and that just because you can't make sense of it all, that I won't be able to make sense of it either. Stop with your faithlessness. Do what I've called you to do, to trust me even when nothing makes sense. For what is faith? Tom, I've told you what faith is. I've given you its definition. I'm not hiding these things from you. I've put it in my Word. Go to my Word. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, not things actualized, not things that you already have in your hands. Faith is the conviction of things not seen, as opposed to what you can in this life see. And there are plenty of things, my son, that you have not yet seen, like the whole rest of my really big and amazing picture. Have you read the story of Job, Tom? Have you read what I ordained in life for him? Have you compared your sufferings to that most famous of all sufferings? Did you notice that there were tons of things happening in that story which fully justified and made sense of all of his sufferings, but that Job was completely unaware of, thus his and your questions? Have you read what I said to him? Perhaps you should read it again. And have you considered my son Jesus, who left all of heaven with all of its glories to suffer trials and temptations like no other man, even you, a man of sorrows who can fully sympathize with your weaknesses, yet without sin, and a man who on the cross asked, why? Now there is something you can relate to. And what was the answer? Well, in that moment, there was no answer. But you know that answer, Tom, don't you? The answer is for you. You're not supposed to know the answers to every question that life leads you to pose, and there will be many. I, God, am supposed to know the answer, and here's the deal. I do. You are supposed to trust in me, and when you doubt my love or goodness, you're supposed to go to the cross over and over and over again, where my love for you is forever and indelibly written in the most precious ointment ever fashioned, the blood of my precious Son. It is a healing balm for the troubled heart of mine. So, Tom, stop with your fussing. Enough with your anger, put it away. Quit demanding answers that you are not even equipped to understand, and run instead to my cross, which was a tree of death to my son, but which is a tree of life to you. Eat the fruit of his body and drink the wine of his blood, and come home, my son, to the Father who loves you, who collects all of your tears in his bottle, Psalm 56:8. And he promises one day to wipe them all away, Revelation 21:4. As I reveal to you, Tom, the great beauty of your life, as it finally finds its place in my picture. There, and only there, the colors and hues and odd and nonsensical shapes will suddenly make sense. And there you will stand in awe of how I can take even the darkest, most evil, awful things, like the unjust murder of my own son, for example, and out of them bring light and beauty and goodness and life. Come home, my son. Do not delay. And then I said, now substitute Bill for Tom. And I say that to you because this story, Joseph, is such a great illustration of this. The difference, I think, being that for our benefit, God allows Joseph, while he's still alive, to see how his life fits into the big picture. And all of these crazy things that occur in his life that make no sense at all and seem like they're drawing him and taking him farther away from what he knows to be the Word of God for him, are actually bringing him closer. So I want to look at this story. I want to unpack it together with you guys. I hope that someday you can unpack it with some others, but with the puzzle piece in mind. Okay? One of the things you got to know when you come to the story is that it's 14 chapters long. That should tell you something about the story. The story of Joseph is longer than the creation story. That gets 2 chapters. It's longer than the story of Noah. That gets 4. It's longer than the story of Abraham. He gets 13. Isaac gets 3. Jacob gets 9. Joseph gets 14 chapters. This is a very significant story. Joseph is hated by his brothers. They're envious of him. That should strike a chord with you because you have now these categories of thought. And their hatred for him only grows when they go out and do something wrong, and we don't know what it is that they did wrong, but Joseph knew what it was, and he took it back to Dad, and he said, Dad, this is what they did wrong, and Dad obviously got onto the brothers, and now they hate him even more. Now he's a tattletale. Then it gets worse. Joseph 17, he has 2 dreams or visions from God. So now it's not just Dad who's favoring Joseph, now who's favoring Joseph? God is favoring Joseph. I mean, none of these other guys are having visions and dreams from the Lord. My goodness, you know. I mean, if you're one of the brothers, you got to feel that so they hate him even more. And then when he tells them his dreams, oh boy, now he's really in trouble. Because in the dreams, if you'll recall, Joseph is standing, and all of his brothers who already hate him are doing what? They're bowing at his feet. Can you imagine how that must have stuck in their throat? No, man, I mean, this kid has got it all going. Now I'm going to bow to him. They decide to make the dreams never happen. They decide to kill him. His brothers, who are envious of him and who hate him so much, decide that they are going to kill him. Okay? He's the favorite son of the Father. He comes bearing the obvious gifting of the Father. The gifting nobody else has. So anyway, Joseph's brothers take their father's herds and they head out of town to find a place to graze, and they end up in a foreign land, and they stay away so long, you know the story, that Jacob becomes concerned about his sons, and probably also, I'm sure, about his flocks. And so he does what he probably wouldn't have otherwise done. He takes Joseph, whom he had kept at home. He didn't send him away with his brothers. Jacob's not blind to the fact that his brothers don't like Joseph. But he feels forced, I guess, because they stay away so long. So he sends Joseph off to the foreign land to find his brothers. His favorite son of the father is going to go to a foreign land to find his brothers and flocks, to be met with their envy and hatred. And they see him coming. And they make their plan quickly. And they seize him. They strip him of his tunic. So now he's naked. And they throw him in a pit, a cistern in the ground. It's a water collection cistern. It's like an empty container that they would dig under the ground so that when the rains would come, the water would flow into this cistern, but there's no water in it. They drop him down into this pit of the ground, and here's the really compassionate and nice thing that they do. They then sit around, apparently, the mouth of the well, and they have lunch, and they talk over what they're going to do with Joseph. And the story later says that they heard him crying out for his life, begging to be spared. These men are heartless. This is a terrible thing that they're doing. And while they're eating, some spice traders from Egypt come by. And I talked to you a little bit about that yesterday, I think. We talked about the fact that in the ancient Near East, Egypt drove the spice trade. And why did they drive the spice trade? Remember? What kind of spices were they that were going down? Spice for the dead. Burial spices. It's the place of the mummies. Biblically speaking, Egypt is the land of the dead. They're going to send their brother to the land of the dead, is the idea. So here come the spice traders, and Judah, and his name, by the way, is only Judah in Hebrew. Guess what his name is in Greek, which is what the New Testament is written in? Judas. Judas Iscariot was not named Judas. His name was Judah. But the New Testament is written in Greek, and the Greek version of the Hebrew name Judah is Judas. You see? So we know him as Judas. His name is Judah. Jesus' name, what do you think Jesus' name is in the Hebrew? Joshua. That's right. But the New Testament is written in Greek, so we have Jesus. Anyway, Judah, whose name in the Greek is Judas, comes up with an idea. And he says, why don't we do this? Instead of killing him, let's yank him up out of that pit. Let's bind him up. Let's sell him off to these guys for silver. And that's exactly what they do. So, Joseph heads off to Egypt, down to the land of the dead, where he's sold as a slave to a very prominent man named Potiphar, who has an interesting wife, which we'll get to. And the brothers then kill a goat, and they dip his coat in the blood, you see, and then they present it to their father, who assumes that he has been destroyed or killed by a wild beast. And then the Bible says something that is almost unthinkable to most people. It says in Genesis 39, verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph. Okay, just a little pause. As you're preaching or teaching through a story like this, you've heard the story, you understand the puzzle piece theology, you have all of these benefits that most of your people don't have. You need to put yourself in their sandals, as I've been saying all along, and you need to anticipate how they're going to feel when they hear that verse. The Lord was with Joseph? Are you kidding me? If that's what it means for the Lord to be with you, no thanks. Seems to me that if the Lord was with Joseph, his brothers would be the one heading for Egypt, and not him. They'd be in the pit, and he'd be riding home with the sheep. If the Lord was with Joseph, clearly his brothers would have just submitted to the authority of their father, who happened to choose Joseph. Your husband does not concern himself with anything in the house, everything that he owns. Hear that? He has entrusted to my care. He's given authority over everything. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, and for good reason, because you're his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against my master? Is that what he says? Sin against God. And though she spoke to Joseph every day, day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even to be with her. And what's amazing to me about that is not just that he's 17 years old and he's a guy. Okay? For all the men, that's all you need to say. It's not just that as the wife of a very prominent man, she would have been a very beautiful woman in all likelihood. It's not just that he's far from home and nobody would know. It is that he remains faithful to God, even though when all he has to look at, and it's all he's got, is his little puzzle piece life. Nothing inside the edges of that little life suggests that God has remained faithful to him. And yet the Lord is with Joseph, even when he can't see it. So Joseph turns her down, and you know the deal. She will not be denied, and so she plans a kind of a trap for Joseph, really. She waits for him knowing he's morning rounds. She sends the servants out of the house so nobody's around. She makes herself as attractive, I'm sure, as she possibly could. And here he comes, and no one's around. And she propositions him, and he will not take the proposition. She's aggressive with him. She's a predator, really. She grabs his clothes. Watch the clothes in this story. Every time this man changes clothes, something significant happens in this story. It's a very artfully written story. And he leaves his clothes behind. So now you know something's going to happen right there. And he flees, and she takes his cloak. And she says that he's trying to rape her. And Potiphar, who I don't think bought it, because I think if he bought it, he would have him killed, has to do something. And so throws him into the pit of Pharaoh's dungeon. Okay? So how's the puzzle piece looking so far? For doing the right thing, he's now in prison. And he's not just there for a couple of days, guys. He's there for years. And so just in case you or your people, as you're working through the story, are beginning to doubt that God is with them, Moses tells us again in Genesis 39, verse 20, but while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. What a lesson. There's a lot of different kinds of prison in this life. Financial prisons that we feel trapped in. Sin prisons where we feel like we're locked into something and we can't escape. The Lord is with this man. And of course, God favors him, and he is given, or the favor of God is recognized by the chief jailer, who takes the whole jail and puts it under the authority of Joseph. So there's a pattern. He always rises to second in command, and everything is placed under his authority each time. And then one day, after a very long period of time in the prison, two very significant prisoners show up, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker of Pharaoh. One day, Joseph, as he's ministering to these guys, notices that they're looking down, asks them what the deal is, and they say, well, we've had a dream. And they know that each one of them had had a dream that would reveal their future. They didn't have pizza the night before and had kind of a crazy dream. No, they understood. This is a prophetic dream, but they're in jail. Who in the world in prison is going to be able to interpret this dream? They're cut off in jail from all of the wise men of Egypt. And Joseph says, well, actually, since I'm here and all, God has given me the ability to interpret dreams. Which implies what? God has given me the ability to interpret dreams. If Joseph had interpreted his dreams earlier and thought he had gotten them wrong, do you think he would say this? He's not sitting in prison years and years later, having been sold into slavery, having been now betrayed by and for the right thing, being thrown into prison, sitting there thinking, well, my goodness, I had these dreams long ago and I thought I knew what they meant, but obviously I was wrong. He still believes in his dreams. That's the point. And that's really significant. So he says, tell me your dreams. And they tell him their dreams. You know, the cupbearer goes first, tells him his dream. And Joseph says, wow, that's a wonderful dream. Here's what that means. In 3 days, Pharaoh is going to lift you up, lift up your head. He's going to exalt you again to your former position. And the chief baker, who's very excited because the other guy got a really good interpretation, tells him his dream. And Joseph says, well, you know, I don't know how to tell you this, but Pharaoh's going to lift your head up too, but in a very different kind of way. All at a time. You know, that's it. You're going to die. He's going to live. And that is exactly how it plays out. But just before the cupbearer leaves, Joseph says to him, look, for 2 years, man, I'm stuck here. Oh, I'm sorry. He says to him, look, when you get out, remember me. Don't forget me. Don't leave me in here because I've been betrayed and I shouldn't be in here and so forth. And yet, the cupbearer forgets him and he sits there for another 2 years. Big deal. Until Pharaoh has a dream. And the cupbearer has an aha moment. He remembers, hey, the guy in prison, we both had these dreams and he was right. And nobody can interpret Pharaoh's dreams. So he comes forward and says, well, we got this guy in prison. He's a Hebrew. He was right about us. So, Pharaoh must be desperate at this point. So he pulls Joseph up out of prison. They clean Joseph up. Joseph shaves. And what do you think Joseph gets? He gets some new clothes. So you know his fortunes are about to change. And he stands before Pharaoh who says, I hear that you can interpret dreams. And I love it. Joseph says this, verse 16, he says, I cannot do it. You know? And you can just see the cupbearer standing there with a little bead of sweat starting to roll down the side of his face. Because he's told him that he can. I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. That is a very opportunistic statement. He's standing before one of the most powerful men in the world, if not the most powerful man at the time, who has not asked him about God, who himself has been worshipped as a God, who believes in a whole pantheon of gods, and he's using this as an opportunity not to promote himself, but to tell this man about God. Opportunistic for Joseph would have looked like, yes, I can. Wouldn't it be more valuable to have me up here than down there in your prison? But he seizes the moment to, in some sense, share the gospel, at least to say, hey, the true and the living God can do this, and you're going to get to see it. I cannot do it, Joseph replied, but Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer that he desires. And so Pharaoh tells him his dreams, and Joseph says, okay, here's what they mean. There's about to be 7 years of great abundance and plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And 7 years of famine is a death sentence for the nation. Year of famine, okay, 2 years, maybe 3, now we're really stretching it. 4, we lost the animals. 5, not a lot of people left. Everybody in the chamber is stunned. They don't know what to do with that. And then prison guy, Joseph, even though Pharaoh has not asked for any advice, unsolicited, gives Pharaoh the plan. Here's what you ought to do. This is boldness. He says, and now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance, They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. And the plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all of his officials. That's rare. So Pharaoh asked them, "Can we find anyone like this man in whom is the Spirit of God?" Because after all, we've known him for about 20 minutes, and apparently he's done a great job of running the prison. This stuff doesn't happen apart from the Lord. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all of this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. And you shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your authority. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." So he rises to the top, second only to Pharaoh, everything under his authority. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt, from the pit to the palace in one day," guys. That's resurrection. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger, representing his own authority, and he put it on Joseph's finger, and he dressed him in new clothes. But notice the clothes, the robes of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and the men shouted before him, "Make way." What it actually says in the Hebrew is, the men shouted before him, "Bow the knee." The knee will bow before him. And thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Go to Egypt. And then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt, but Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother. Rachel, his favorite wife, had 2 children. The first was Joseph, and the second was who? Benjamin. Guess who became the favorite once Joseph disappeared? I mean, I don't know that he's wearing a multicolored tunic at this point, but I wouldn't have been surprised if he was. Listen to what it says. Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brothers, with the others because he was afraid that harm might come to him. Jacob is not a slow man. The last time I sent my favorite son off to find those guys, I got a bloody tunic in return. So these 10 brothers set off for Egypt to buy food, and there's Joseph. He's 40 years old. He's clean-shaved. He's wearing the white linen, the gold necklace. He's speaking only in perfect Egyptian. He's the Lord of the land of Egypt, and they don't recognize him for all of those reasons and 100 others, I'm sure. This is not what they're expecting. They bow down before him, and you think the dream is fulfilled, but it's not. There's a brother missing. And the question is this: have his brothers changed, or is Benjamin now in peril? See, when the 10 show up, not 11, and he knows Benjamin is the one that stayed home with Dad, he knows Benjamin is now the new favorite. And he's worried that Benjamin might end up in the same boat that he ended up in. Have his brothers changed, or are they the same bad guys that grabbed him, stripped him, threw him in a pit, bound him, sold him into the land of death? And so now he sets about planning to figure that out. The way that he does it is he recreates their crime that they had committed against him. So he speaks harshly to them because they had spoken harshly to him. This is all in the story. You can actually track the language in the story. He throws them into a pit of a prison, just like they had thrown him into a pit of a prison. He pulls them up out of prison, just like they had done to him. And he has Simeon, one of them, bound, just like they bound him. And he keeps him behind in Egypt, just like they had bound him down to Egypt. And then he gives them the food they came looking for. And he sends them, not from Canaan to Egypt, but from Egypt to Canaan. And then when they get home, they each open up their sacks of food. And what's at the top of their sacks? Silver. Their silver, the thing that they had sold Joseph for. And the Lord begins to afflict their conscience. The plan is working. But he says to them, don't you dare come back here without Benjamin. So will they abandon Simeon? So they come back, and he knows that they'll be back. Because he knows the family's going to be 7 years. And sure enough, this time they bring Benjamin with them. And Joseph throws a feast at his house. He seats them according to their order of birth. How does he know that? They notice, but it's like, whatever. And then what does he do? He gives in their presence 5 times as much food to Benjamin. It's like if I brought each one of you one plate, right? And I got to Bill and I said, stay there, I got a whole tray full of food for you, buddy. That's for you. I mean, he's a big man. But you get the idea. He is showing obvious favoritism to the son that he knows is also the favorite son of his dad. And he's watching. What are they going to do? How are they going to react? What's going to happen? And they pass the test. Are they different? Have they changed? So he takes his silver goblet, Joseph does, and he goes to his steward and says, here's the deal. I want you to give them their food. I want you to put the money back in the sacks, just like you did the last time. But I want you to take my personal, unique silver goblet, none other like it in the world, no mistaking to whom it belongs, and I want you to put it in the bag of food of this boy Benjamin. And he does, and they leave with Simeon this time, thinking that they've escaped. And no sooner do they get out of town, but then here comes Joseph's little army, and they surround him. And the man, the steward, says, somebody has stolen the cup of my master. And they're looking around like, how dumb do you think we are? I mean, we're just happy to get out of there with our brother. And I mean, why in the world would we do such a stupid thing? They are so positive that none of them would have ever done such a thing that they say to him, look, in whoever's bag of food you find it, let that person be your slave. Or no, they said, well, be your slave. I can't remember. Let that person be your slave, I think is the idea. That's what I get for not reviewing my notes. And of course, he starts going through the bags of food. Guess where he starts? Oldest to youngest. You can feel the drama building, as he opens up each one. See, I told you he wasn't there, And he opens up the next one, and now he's getting cocky. Like, yeah, why don't you open this one, So he opens that. Nope, it's not there either. He opens that, not there either. He opens that. Get down to the last one. They're all feeling pretty good about themselves. He opens the favorite son's sack. And there it is. What has Joseph just done? He's given them an opportunity to get rid of the favorite son of their father. So are they going to take it? Or are they not going to take it? They've got every excuse they need to go back to their dad and say, that idiot son of yours, Benjamin. I mean, I've got it on my phone. I took pictures. Can you believe what he did? How furious must they have been? They certainly could have been. Because it sure looked like he was guilty. I'm sure he's going, They don't do it. They're different men. And notice who the hero in the story is. They all go back together. They're a band of brothers truly for the first time. And they all throw themselves down before Joseph. Dream is fulfilled. And Judah steps forward and says, okay. Because Joseph says, look, why don't you just leave him here with me? You guys go. And Judah, the hero of the whole story of Joseph, says, your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. I said, if I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you to my father all my life. Forever, it says literally. Now then, please, let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in the place of the boy. The innocent is offering his life as a substitute for the guilty, or at least for the seemingly guilty. And let the boy return with his brothers. He does it out of love for his dad. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come upon my father. And Joseph realizes that his brothers have changed. And he comes unglued. Think about that. All his life, he's wanted a real relationship with these men. All his life, he's wanted to know that they're capable of loving him the way he would love them. They're his older brothers. You love your older brothers. You admire your older brothers, even if they're rough on you. You want to impress your older brothers. There's a real human element to this. It's amazing. He weeps so loud they hear him in Pharaoh's presence, which tells you he's in a pretty nice neighborhood. But for the first time in the story, he speaks to his brothers in Hebrew, having sent out all of his servants. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified of his presence. And then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. And when they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with you or with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that who sent me here? That God sent me ahead of you. He's saying, guys, look at how my piece fits into the puzzle. And because he sees how his piece fits into the puzzle, he's able to be forgiving. He sees how the God who takes good out of evil and brings good out of evil over and over again has brought good even out of the evil of his brothers, and he's recognized the great salvation that has come as a result. And he's saying, it's okay. God used your wickedness for good. And he used it to get me here. For 2 years now, there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be not plowing and reaping, but God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on the earth, and to save your lives by great deliverance. And so then it was not you who sent me here, but God. Awesome story. And that's obviously not the whole of it. I just give you a lot of details. But it points to the one who's greater than Joseph. To Jesus, the chosen Son of the Father, the good shepherd of his Father's flock, whom the Father sent to a foreign land, and who came so obviously gifted of the Father. He spoke as one who is, nobody else has spoken like this. Constantly it says they're amazed at what he says, the way that he speaks, the authority with which he speaks, the miracles that he does. He's like none of his other brothers, and as a result, he's hated and envied and betrayed by them. And they hate him all the more, for he speaks against their evil deeds and calls them things, as we've seen, like servants. Now that doesn't make a lot of friends, servants. It points to Jesus, who was sold for silver by a man whose name in Greek is Judas, but in Hebrew is Judah, who was stripped of his coat. And you'll recall it was a unique coat. It was made of one weave, and the soldiers played dice for it because they didn't want to tear it up. Who in Revelation 19, verse 13, is pictured wearing a coat dipped in blood. Does that sound familiar? They dipped Joseph's coat in blood. It points to Jesus, who was bound and thrown into an empty pit, but who, like Joseph, didn't stay there. He arose from the pit to offer bread to all nations who come to him. But Joseph could only offer a literal physical bread. Jesus offers the bread of his body and the wine of his blood. Joseph was thrown into a pit by his brothers, who sat down to eat a meal and cried out to their lives, or for their lives. Jesus Christ offers a spiritual meal by which we have eternal life to all who cry out to him for life. Jesus, like Joseph, was accused of a crime that he didn't commit, unjustly thrown into the pit, only to arise from the pit and to ascend to the right hand not of Pharaoh, but of the King of the universe. And Jesus has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. He's pictured in the book of Revelation wearing a white linen gown and a gold sash about his neck. And Paul says that one day every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that he is Lord. There it is. The story of Joseph. Amazing story.